My job was to identify countries with resources our corporations want, like oil was one of the big ones back then, and then convince the country to convince the president or the minister of finance, whoever, to take a huge loan from the World Bank to hire U.S. engineering corporations to build big infrastructure projects like power systems, hydroelectric plants, and the transmission distribution lines, and highways, industrial parks, things like this. These are things that benefited, first of all, the companies that built them, U.S. corporations that made huge profits off building them, but also benefited a few wealthy families in those countries, including the president and his cronies, who owned the commercial and industrial establishments that benefit from that infrastructure.
Right.
But it didn't help the people. In fact, the majority of the people ended up suffering because money was diverted from education, health care, and other social services to pay off the interest on the loans. And in the end, the loans couldn't be repaid. And so the contract with the company, through the World Bank or whatever establishment we were using as a banking institution, was that their oil or whatever the resource was that we coveted was collateral on the loan. So when they couldn't repay the loan, we go back, I'd go back, and now I'd be basically working for the International Monetary Fund, which is sort of the policing organization around all of this, and say, hey, we'll restructure your loan. But
we own you.
But we own you, and you need to sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies without many environmental or social regulations. You need to privatize your water and sewage systems and sell them to some of our investors. You need to let us build a military base on your soil and vote with us on the next United Nations vote against Cuba, for example. So basically we set these terms that were very colonialistic. We were bringing them into our realm through the use of debt. So we were really creating an empire, but not through the military. We realized after Vietnam that the military wasn't very effective at winning the hearts and minds of people. And the way to do it was through economics.
Jesus Christ. Hold on. Let's wait a second. There's a trash truck emptying a dumpster right outside of our door, and it's ridiculous.
I'm glad to know that's what it is.
It's not a tank pulling up.
Incidentally, I don't know whether we're still being recorded or not, but I just wanted to, when I've watched some of your programs before, and I've watched it with my partner, and she and I look at it, are those guys drinking beer?
Yeah, right. It looks like beer.
Looks like
That's
beer.
the goal. It's supposed to look like beer because when kids go to like music festivals or like rock concerts, right? When your friends are drinking beer and you want to stay sober and stay hydrated and healthy, you can look like you're drinking a beer and fit in and just be getting hydrated.
Oh, it's water.
And they made water metal, right?
Yeah.
So their slogan is "Murder Your Thirst."
Excellent.
It's pretty cool. It's cool water.
Yeah.
And it's environmentally friendly.
Is that my camera?
Yes.
It's water.
Don't be afraid. It's just water.
It's just water. I'm not drinking beer on this program. Not that I wouldn't if I were offered one, but...
Annie Jacobson refused to drink it when I gave it to her.
Because
it was called Liquid Death. She's like, I'm not drinking that. I'm like, Annie, it's just water. Don't be afraid. She's like, I don't care. I'm not drinking anything with the word death on it. I'm like, okay, I don't blame you.
there's a Jaguar to touch.
Yeah, right? Oh, man. All right, what were we just talking about? Basically, you were just laying out the way you guys were colonizing the world and strong-arming nations to basically bend to your will and let you use their resources for a discount because you guys conned them into some bad loan that they could never repay.
Yes. And here's where the perception thing comes in. We provided them with a really nice report, and that's where I came. I wrote good reports. I'd been an English major. I like to write, so I could write these reports. And with all the statistics that my guys had produced, but this report would say, if you invest all this money in building this infrastructure, hiring our companies to build this infrastructure, your economy will grow. And we measured it by GDP, gross domestic product. And it's true. When you invest this money in that kind of infrastructure, the GDP grows. And so the president would be happy. He'd take it out to his people, take it to the newspapers and say, hey, we've just taken out this loan. Our economy is going to grow. And it did. And I believed for many years when I was doing this, coming out of the Peace Corps, I had a good conscience. I thought I believed that I was doing the right thing because that's what econometrics show, that when you do this, your economy grows. But what we didn't understand, what I didn't understand, is that GDP basically measures how well the wealthy are doing, how well the big corporations are doing. It does not measure the prosperity of the average citizen.
No. It's the overall country.
Right. So it's a statistic that's warped in favor of big international corporations and the very wealthy and powerful. So, but we were producing these reports.
Well, it's warped in favor of the country, right? It's the GDP only reflects the country. It doesn't
but it only reflects the wealthy people in the country and the corporations in the country. That's what it mainly reflects.
Right.
So
you're saying that they're mainly responsible for the largest percent of the GDP.
Yeah. Well, here's an example. Let's say there's 3 people in the United States that have as much wealth as half the rest of the population of the United States. So if those 3 people last year made 10% on their investment and half the country lost 3%, and everybody else remained the same, you can do a back-of-the-envelope calculation, you would show a growth of almost 4%, when in fact only 3 people made any money. Everybody else either stayed the same or lost 3%.
Right.
And so these statistics are extremely, extremely deceptive, but they create this perception, and then they put the country deep into debt, and then we take its resources. And so it's a very, very clever and insidious system. It's all based on a con.
So your chart that you would give them, showing them how their GDP would rise, how was that chart? How did that chart work? Did you basically show them the money that they were going to make? Or did you basically manipulate the chart saying that the middle class, so the lower class, was going to be boosted by this? How did that chart look?
The simplest answer to that is that you could chart other countries that are taking these loans. You'd have a graph and you'd have a whole series of countries. And the ones that had accepted these loans and built this infrastructure, their GDP had gone way up. The ones that didn't get the loans, their GDP was still way down here. That's the simplest explanation. Okay. But we'd produced much more sophisticated models that went into each sector and showed what we could expect the industrial sector to grow by, the banking sector, the commercial sector, the agricultural sector. So we created these very, very sophisticated, complicated econometric models that nobody but an econometrician could understand anyway. But the World Bank liked them because they were all into that kind of stuff.
Right.
And the presidents liked the conclusion. And incidentally, so the other thing was that these presidents or ministers of finance knew that if they didn't accept these loans, then the people we called the jackals would step in.
Felix Rodriguez?
I think Felix could be rated as one of those. But yeah, these are people that either overthrow governments or assassinate leaders. And usually they don't even need to step in. So basically, I go into a president's office and I say, look, Mr. President, here's a few $1 billion I can offer you in a loan that you can use to really improve your GDP. Or if you don't take this loan, I've got a gun in this other hand. Now, I didn't carry a gun, but he and I both knew there were people behind me that carried guns. And, they'd overthrown Allende in Chile, and Arbenz in Guatemala, and Mossadegh in Iran, and Lumumba in the Congo. And
so we're talking about the CIA knuckle draggers.
CIA operatives, and sometimes it's very convoluted. So the CIA may actually use operatives from Argentina or some other place where they've got influence, so they're not directly connected.
Right.
But there are these people, and the presidents of these countries know that they're there. And so, what do you do if you're a president? I tell you, hey, Mr. President, I'm going to help you become rich and look really good to your people. You'd be reelected, and your family owns these industries, and they're going to benefit from better electrical power and better highways. So I offer you this, or don't take it, and you'll probably be thrown out of power and maybe taken out. So I talk about the death economy, which is what that has created, and I was part of creating that. We've created an economic system that is marching us we're consuming and polluting ourselves towards self-destruction, based on this perception of maximization of short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. What if we turned that around and said, let's have our goal be to make short-term profits for business, because you got to make some profits, but you don't have to maximize them. Put a bunch of that money and put a bunch of the effort and energy into creating a life economy, an economic system that pays people to clean up pollution, to corral all the plastic that's floating around in the oceans and recycle it, to regenerate destroyed environments, to create technologies, solar and wind. We're on the way to doing that. We are in the process of creating a life economy. But let's pay people to do things that make life better, to make life for all living creatures, and for my 16-year-old grandson and all of his brothers and sisters around the world. There's no reason why we can't have a really good lifestyles, but by paying ourselves to do things that are not based on short-term maximization and destruction, the death economy. I like that instead of the term construction, often a lot of what we call construction these days is actually destruction. So I think we can come up with an economic system that gives us both, that allows us to use these technologies in support of all life and in support of future. And we can have growth. It's just that we can't have growth in the areas where we've been looking at it, this extreme materialistic tearing up of the earth. We don't need to go out and mine for copper. There's a lot of copper around that's just not being used. Think of all the pennies.
What about cobalt? What about lithium? We need these iPhones, don't we?
Yeah.
We need our Tesla cars that drive on batteries and that have these big fancy screens in them.
Yeah.
That's a lot of slave labor, a lot of mining of lithium.
It doesn't have to be slave labor. Yes, we might have to pay more, but we'd also be paying people more to do these tasks. And so, Henry Ford said, I want to pay everybody in my factories enough money so they can buy a Ford car. Well, what if we paid those miners in the Congo and elsewhere who are mining lithium? What if we paid them enough so they could buy cell phones and electric cars and convert?
Then no one would be able to afford an iPhone.
Well, I think, if we look at human history, we've been around as...
And I would be willing to pay more for an iPhone if it would get rid of that shit.
Yeah, so would I.
But
I think a lot of people would, I think.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of redefining what it means to be successful. For most of human history, 200,000 years or so, that we've defined ourselves as Homo sapiens sapiens, wise humans, which is kind of a laugh because who else is destroying a lot? But my cats aren't destroying the world around them. They may be, wreaking havoc on my house. But for about those 200,000, most of those 200,000 years, we've lived in a life economy, an economic system that regenerates itself. And the indigenous people I work with, it's all about the long term. They're not just looking at the short term. And it's only been within the last blink of an eye of history, maybe 2,000 years, but a short term in the history of humans, that we've been on this trajectory of creating a system that ultimately seems to be headed towards self-destruction. And I would just add that when I was in business school back in the late 60s, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors, but also pays his employees well, gives them health care insurance, pension funds, and invests in the communities where his factories are built by putting money into recreational facilities, or libraries, or educational facilities. In other words, is a good citizen, not maximizing profits, making enough profits, a decent rate of return. And then in 1976, Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And Friedman had the ear of the world. And he said, no, the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. That was a fairly new concept. It had been growing. But he really had to take off. Thatcher loved him, and Reagan loved him. And he traveled around the world promoting this concept of maximization of profits. And Jack Welch comes along at GE, and other people became these icons of cutting costs, cutting people's salaries, firing people to make the bottom line, to make profits bigger and bigger and bigger, put it in the hands of a few wealthy investors who are already wealthy and make them more wealthy. Mm-hmm. That's the course we've been taking, and it's taking us into this death economy. We have an opportunity now to turn that around, to redefine what it means to be successful humans, to create a life economy. I have to say, Danny, I'm excited to still be alive at this time when we're moving in this direction. I think everybody listening to this program should feel blessed that you live at this time, that we're here now, that we have this opportunity. We are understanding that we're on a trajectory that's dangerous, very dangerous, whether we're talking about what's going on with the potential wars and nuclear explosions, climate change. It all comes back to an economic system that we can call a death economy. These other things are symptoms. They're not the problem. They are problems, but they're not the problem. The problem comes back to human greed that's defined in this idea of a death economy. But human greed is not inherent in human beings. I don't see it in indigenous cultures. I don't think we had it for most of our 200,000 years. People took care of each other. It was important to be part of the community. You know, Native North Americans had this thing called the potlatch, you know, and part of it was giving away what you had. It wasn't trying to take more from people. It was giving away. You know, and the people I work with in the Amazon, if you're a good canoe builder, you build canoes and you give me a canoe in exchange. I'm a good hunter, so I bring back some good meat for you on a weekly basis or whatever. There's this exchange, but it's recognized that if anybody is suffering needlessly, I mean, people may suffer because they broke a leg or whatever, but if anybody is suffering needlessly for want of something, the whole community suffers and you take care of it. Mm-hmm. I think that's human nature. And I think we've moved away from it by a philosophy, a mindset, perception. We get back to touching the jaguar. Let's touch that jaguar and turn the perception around of what it means to be successful humans, be successful human beings, being human. Let's be human.
I get what you're saying. I agree with you. But due to the trajectory that we're currently on right now in this world, in this nation, do you really see that as a possibility?
I do.
How so? How would it be implemented?
I wouldn't be sitting here with you if I didn't believe that. I wouldn't be writing books. Mm-hmm. I'd be out, whining and dining and bringing myself silly. I don't know. No, I do. I think we're moving in that direction.
Really?
Yes. I mean,
how so?
Solar, wind.
Solar and wind
have moved us away from fossil fuels. They're at their infancy. But 20 years ago, everybody said solar will never be economically feasible. It is. But that's just one example. What I hear, and I've had the opportunity to travel around the world speaking because of these books that have gotten to be so popular, and more recently doing a lot of it by Zoom. And everywhere I go, I see that people are really waking up to the fact that we have to change. And that's the first stage. They're not actually changing. Remember, perception. Our perception is changing. The next step is to implement actions that honor the new perception, and then that changes reality. We haven't really got to taking the actions in a very strong way yet. And as you mentioned earlier, we're being distracted terribly by the war in Israel, or in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, and so many distractions. The political outrage that's hitting this country right now is, a big distraction.
Yeah.
And there's so many distractions, but people still around the world are getting that we need to change. I mean, yes, I do think there's hope. I would hate to put a probability on it because I also think there's a pretty high probability that we won't go that direction. And if we don't make the changes that we need to make, we're headed toward more and more catastrophe. I truly believe. So there's these two paths. In fact, the Algonquin-speaking people where I come from in New Hampshire, a long time ago said human beings at some point in history are going to be offered the opportunity to take two paths. One path will lead to their destruction as human beings. The other will lead to a much more glorious world. I think we're at that crossroads right now. That's my belief, and I'm sticking to it. It may not be true, but it gives me the hope that we can take the right path, and I see people around the world wanting to do that. I don't think I told you about the time I was poisoned.
No,
but that's an interesting story about.
Is this when you were writing your book?
Yeah. Interesting story about being in shape.
I wanted to ask you about that too. Like
I brought that up because about the being in shape thing.
Okay. What happened when you decided to write this book, and how did you go about writing the book?
Yeah. So initially, after I got out of the business, I started writing a book that I wanted to be an expose, that I wanted to interview other people that had jobs like mine, and the jackals, because I know quite a few of them. And I started contacting them, and almost immediately I got anonymous phone calls threatening my life and that of my infant daughter, who's now in her 40s, but yeah, she was an infant. And I was terrified because I knew what these people can do. I'd seen it. And at that time, I had just left the job at Charles T. Maine, and I get invited out to lunch by the president of Stone & Webster Engineering Company, huge engineering company, also out of Boston. And he takes me out to lunch and he says, you have a great resume. You were chief economist at one of our rival companies, and I want to use your resume in our proposals. I want to have the opportunity to do that. You don't have to do much work for us. Maybe I'll ask you to fly a private jet down to Rio de Janeiro once in a while, have dinner with some people or something. Well, you don't have to do much. Just let me use your resume, and I'm prepared to write you a check tomorrow morning for $500,000, $500,000 as a consultant's retainer. Now, this is in the late 80s. $500,000 is nothing to sneeze at today, but it was a lot more back then.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a bigger sneeze.
Quadruple, probably.
Yeah. So, and then he says, just don't write the book that I know that you've been working on. So I'm getting exactly what I had dished out to presidents and others. I'm getting, okay, in this hand, I've got $500,000 for you. You don't have to do much to earn it. Just here it is. Oh, and we're also going to pay you a monthly fee. In this hand, the jackal has been calling me, threatening my life and that of my daughter, getting exactly what I'd been dishing out, and I know this. What do I do? What would you do? What would you do, Danny? What would you do?
Yeah. Take the money and run.
Yeah. So I did. I took the money, and, in my own defense, I'll say I didn't go out and buy fancy cars or a big house or something. I reinvested into going back to the Amazon and offering and forming a nonprofit called Dream Change to help the people of the Amazon protect the forest where I had lived and that had such a huge impact on me. And I started writing books about them. So I wrote 5 books on shamanism and indigenous people. Stone & Webster was fine with me doing that. In fact, they were happy that I'm writing books about things to get my name out there more and associated with them. But I didn't write the book that they told me not to write.
Okay.
And then many years later, my contract with Stone & Webster's over. New presidents come into Stone & Webster who knew me and didn't like me at all, didn't want me around. We had a history. So I'm in the Amazon with a group of people on 9/11. And when I got home, I was living in Florida at the time, I flew up to New York to Ground Zero. And as I stood there looking down into that pit, I knew I had to write about what I had done, which doesn't say there's a direct connection, but it just struck me that I needed to write about what I'd done. But I made the commitment at that point that I wouldn't contact other people. I wouldn't write an expose. I would write a confession, my personal story, And I wouldn't let anybody know I was doing it, because what got me into trouble before is I started contacting people. So, if you're going to be a whistleblower, don't warn people you're going to blow the whistle.
Right.
Blow the whistle and make sure you get all your ducks lined up. And so I did that. I wrote the book, and it was interesting that it was rejected. It was rejected by 39 publishers. I get 39 rejection letters. That takes a lot of touching a lot of jaguars.
Yeah.
And then one publisher bought it, and it went to the New York Times bestseller list very quickly and stayed there for like 70 some odd weeks. And
Now, weren't you worried about getting whacked?
no, at that point, I figure it's my best insurance policy. Once I got it in the hands
Getting it published, you mean?
Yeah, but even getting it in the hands before it got published, even when it was being rejected, it's out there. There's no stopping it now. And if something strange happens to me, it's going to sell a lot more books. Shoot me now and see how many books get sold.
Right.
So now I figured that was my best insurance policy. And I think I was right, except a few months after the book was published, at the end of 2004, in early 2005, I was invited to speak at the United Nations. And I fly up to New York from Florida, and before I'm doing a lot of interviews. I did a lot of interviews, and I have a publicist who works with a publishing company. And there's this one guy who wants to interview me, but he doesn't have very good credentials, so we've been putting him off. But finally, my publicist calls me, and she says, he's offered to pick you up at LaGuardia and to drive you to where you're going to stay tonight, which is a friend's house, an old friend on Central Park, and he'll take you out to lunch. That'd probably be better than taking a cab. Why don't you do it? So I did it. And we go to this restaurant, Italian restaurant, and I order it, and the meal comes, and I go to the restroom, and I eat the meal. And this guy was lame, he just terrible journalist. He'd ask stupid questions, not like you.
Thank you.
and a couple hours later, I'm in my friend's apartment, and I lost over half the blood of my body through internal bleeding, just gushed out of me. And my friend happened to be a producer at Tom Brokaw's NBC Nightly News. And she had a good friend who was a very well-known gastroenterologist, Pavarotti's gastroenterologist, calls him around 7 o'clock at night at home. And I get on the phone, and I'm shaking. I've gone into shock. And he says, you've got to get to Lenox Hill Hospital. Don't call an ambulance. Take a cab. The ambulances are too slow.
Right.
I'll call ahead and get intravenous set up for you.
Wow.
And get to you'll be dead in 2 hours. Oh. So I go to this hospital, and to make a long story short, they ended up taking out 70% of my large intestine, cutting it out. And we never thought much about it at the time. I was just trying to survive. And as soon as that happened and the word got out, and I obviously had to cancel the talk at the United Nations. My publicist did, and sent word out to everybody that I had these interviews set up with. I can't come. He just had, and people kept pouring in with email and phone calls saying, "Don't you realize John was poisoned?" Never had occurred. And I wasn't thinking. I'm suffering. I wasn't thinking. So I asked my gastroenterologist, and he says, well, it's possible, but we can't prove one way or the other, because as soon as we take something like that out, we incinerate it.
Oh, no.
So if the evidence is incinerated. But that guy disappeared. All my publicist had was his email address, and there was no response anymore. He basically disappeared. It wasn't any point in pursuing him because they had no evidence anyway.
You never could get a hold of him, nothing like that.
No.
So plus, that's pretty much in itself. That's proof that
it sounds pretty suspicious.
Yeah.
And then I called, while I was still in the hospital, I called this friend of mine who was a jackal, who's been in this business. And I said, hey, do you think that, what do you think? And he said, well, yeah, I think it probably was an assassination attempt. And I said, well, who do you think did it? And he said, well, definitely not the alphabet agencies, FBI, CIA.
Not them?
Not them. He said, if it had been them, you wouldn't be talking to me. And besides that, they don't want to see you dead because that's going to sell books. if you die from the, he said already, it was true. Already, book sales have gone spiked again. He said they're not too worried about books. It's just a book. It's out there. It's out there. Killing you is not going to stop the book from being out there.
Right. The book's it's already done.
The book's done. It's out there. And he said so. And I said, well, who then? And he said, well, I think it was. My guess is that it was a fanatic who either hates what you did as an economic hitman or hates the fact that you came clean on it. And I said, well, do you think I need to worry about him coming back? And he said, no, I don't think he'll show his face again. You know who he is now, and he's scared. These guys are cowards. He did a cowardly thing, and he probably feels that he scared the shit out of you, and he doesn't. And he's not going to show up. So he said, I don't think you need to be. Maybe there's others out there, but he said, you can't spend your life being worried about such things. And then I got really, really sick. I was dying. I couldn't keep any food down. I couldn't, and I reached a point where I couldn't even stand up. I'm lying in the sleeping bag the Peace Corps had given me, and on the floor of this hut, and there was no way I could take that journey through the jungle back to try to find one of those rickety old buses and get back up to some medical facility. So I'm kind of resigned to dying. I am resigned to dying at this point. And late one afternoon, the teacher comes up to me, and he's leading this little old man by the hand, and this guy's scary looking. He's practically naked. He's got a loincloth, but his body's covered with these tattoos, and he's little. But I'm lying down on the floor, so he looked pretty big. And the school teacher says, "This guy's the shaman." Mm-hmm. I had no idea what a shaman was. This is 1968, and he says, "Well, he can heal you." Well, what would you do, Danny?
I would say, have at it.
Yeah. What else?
Let's get started, baby.
What have I got to lose?
Give me that good. Yeah. Give me that good dope. That good Amazon dope.
Yeah. Well, I didn't even know there was such a thing, But that night, he did. So this shaman did give me what we now know is ayahuasca, and it took me on this strange journey, and I'm hallucinating, but I've been going through some pretty rough times anyway, and I haven't eaten for a long time, but on this journey, I saw that. So at one point, I've got my eyes closed. I'm lying on this bench. Some shaman men had carried me into the shaman's lodge and put me on this bench, and I've got my eyes closed. And all the shaman says, it's translated by the teacher, but so it's going through a couple of steps. But the shaman says, touch the jaguar. And it's the middle of the night in the middle of the jungle, and you can hear jaguars at night. We've seen their tracks during the day. I know they're around there, and oh my God, I wake up, I open my eyes and look around, where's the jaguar? And the shaman says, no, through the translator, no, close your eyes and see the jaguar and then touch it. So I did, and there was first this amorphous form, and it looked like a jaguar, and I reached out and touched it. And as I did that, I saw and heard my mother saying, son, the food and drink will kill you. And I got to tell you, so the people in the Amazon don't drink water from the rivers because they know the rivers have got organic material, dead animals, rotting trees. Oh, yeah. It's dangerous. So the women make a kind of beer that's called Chicha, and they make it by chewing manioc root and spitting it. And the saliva acts like yeast. It sets up a fermentation process. And you get a beer, and it can get very strong very quickly because you're in the tropics, and you can add water to that. And so that's what they drink. And the foods, one of the favorite foods is you reach into a rotting log and pull out a handful of squirming white grubs and down the hatch.
Insects?
Grubs, worms.
Yeah.
In the wood.
Worms.
High nutrition, but
high protein.
Yeah.
Piranha are actually a huge source of food down there too.
That's
right?
true.
Yeah.
Piranhas, but they're very bony. But you can eat them. They don't don't attack people. That's another myth we can talk about. But I've swum with a lot of piranha. But so
really.
Yeah, and then later in life, I hung out with a lot of piranhas who were in the human form. But they're dangerous. The ones in the rivers, and that's another story. So, uh, so, so I'm realizing I'm drinking a lot of spit beer because you got to rehydrate.
So you're not drinking the beer to get f***ed up. You're just drinking the beer because you need something to drink.
Yeah, that's all there is. Basically, that you can trust. It's because it's got alcohol, so the water's now been kind of purified with the alcohol.
There's no way to like harvest the rainwater or like water from like clean streams to drink.
Well, yes, theoretically there is, but that's not their culture and their custom. They do a lot of chicha.
Okay.
And it's considered also kind of a sacred drink. The women make it, and it's their gift to the men who bring back the animals for protein. So the women make it. So there's this exchange. It's a real strong cultural thing.
Wow.
So they drink a lot of chicha, and they love it. And you got to rehydrate frequently. And I'm eating a lot of squirming white grubs and other things that I won't even mention because there weren't any Cliff Bars. Mm-hmm. So no Perrier, no Cliff Bars. So I'm eating and drinking these things. But I realized on this ayahuasca journey that as I'm doing this, I'm hearing a voice like my mother in my head saying, it'll kill you. My mindset was saying, it'll kill you. And at the same time, I'm seeing in this same vision quest how robust and healthy the Shwa are. You know, the men will carry 200 or 300 pound dead boars and tapirs that they've killed in the jungle, out of the jungle. They get legs that make a World Cup soccer star jealous, you know, and the women, well, I was in my early 20s, and the quite promiscuous culture by tradition, the women were looking quite good.
Yeah.
People live to be very old if they don't die in a hunting accident or a dugout canoe or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. The mortality rate, like the age they live to, it was like it's probably the same age, if not older, as normal cultures. They just don't, unless they, you know, as long as they don't die from wounds from hunting or getting, you know, combat wounds or whatever it is.
Right. Or there's a lot of deaths in childbirth and at the time a very high infant mortality rate. So that brings the whole average way. You know, if you look at averages, that brings it way down. But if people survive the first 10 years, they're likely to live to be very old unless it's an accident or like you said. So I see on this this experience that it isn't the food and drink that's killing me. It's my mindset. It's my perception. It's this voice that's telling me it's killing me. Our minds are so powerful. And the next day, I felt a lot better, and I continued to feel better. And the shaman came back, and kind of it's being translated later, but it turns out he spoke more Spanish than he let on at the beginning. He comes back later and says, you know, I cured you. You owe me, and you need to be my apprentice. Now, this is 1968, just going into 69. And I have I graduated from business school. I'm going to go out and make money. What do you say? Hell out of here. Yeah. I mean, there was no future in shamanism in those days. There is today. But the guy saved my life. So I took it on. And that changed everything. The community now suddenly accepts me. I'm training with one of their most revered elders. Mm-hmm. I'm learning their culture. I'm no longer being held in suspicion. I'm enjoying it. I'm learning how to prepare ayahuasca. I'm learning a lot. And more than anything else, what he kept drilling into me was this idea of touching the jaguar, which is the title of one of my books, and the second from the last book I just wrote a couple of years ago. And what he said that is that when we have a blockage, when there's something that's holding us back, when there's something that's changing our perception, that's hurting us, if we run from it, it'll chase us like a jaguar will if you run from it. But if you reach out and touch it, it gives you the ability, the energy, the wisdom to change your perception. And when you change your perception, you change your actions, and then you change reality. So this illiterate shaman was feeding me this very exciting philosophy of perception molds reality, and which later I would study with shamans and other cultures, and they all have the same concept, but it's also the same concept that runs psychoanalysis, modern psychoanalysis. Perception changes our reality. You know, and business and politics, marketing is all about perception changing reality. You know, Danny, you can't get what you want in life unless you have a jacket just like mine. And I'll be happy to sell this to you for a couple of $1,000s. But you got to have it if you want to have a successful show. You got to have a jacket.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's the perception. Perceptions mold reality, and that's what I would use as an economic hitman. But it was interesting. So that's where I first really connected with this philosophical theory, which I probably have heard in Philosophy 101 in college, but it never really meant much to me. But now it's I've seen, practically speaking.